Hey, it's Tara Marie. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Tara Marie Live. Just a note, we had some technical difficulties, so the audio is not up to our usual standard during the first part of the show. But keep listening because I know you'll learn a lot of great information. Hey guys, it's Tara Marie. I'm here at the Hangar Studios with Dr. James Greenblatt. He's written a fascinating book called Integrative Medicine for Alzheimer's disease. This is an important book, Dr. Greenblatt, because I know that rates are skyrocketing and we're not focused on prevention in this country.
Mental health, neurology, nobody focuses on prevention. So
Exactly.
To look at prevention.
Exactly. Stick around for this very important show. We'll be right back. I'm Tara Marie, and I'm a fitness expert, personal trainer, and motivational strategist. Optimal health is achieved when you're balanced mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, and spiritually. My goal is to bring you information that will help you be the best version of you. Hey, well, hello and welcome to Tara Marie Live. I'm your host, Tara Marie Segundo. I'm a fitness expert, a personal trainer, and a motivational strategist. And we're here at the Hangar Studios in beautiful New York City. Tara Marie Live is about mental, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual health, and my goal is to bring you information that will enhance your health and your life. Now, today's show, I hope, makes you think about, or very differently, about a very grim disease that is so common that many people have come to accept it as just something that happens when we get older. It's the disease that's been called the long goodbye. And some epidemiologists who study trends predict that it will be the greatest public health scourge of the 21st century. It has a 100% mortality rate, and while researchers have tried to develop a drug that will cure this disease, so far none has worked. I'm talking about Alzheimer's disease, and for most of us, the name alone conjures up a sense of fear, feeling like we have no control over whether or not we get it. The statistics rates of Alzheimer's disease are staggering. In the United States in 2018, 10% of people age 65 and older, that's 1 in 10 people age 65 and older, had Alzheimer's disease. And almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's disease are women, and African Americans are about twice as likely to have Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia as older Caucasians. It's the 6th leading cause of death, and pharmaceutical interventions cannot prevent, cure, or even slow down disease progression. This is serious. Of all Americans living with Alzheimer's disease in 2018, check this out, at least 200,000 were younger than 65 years old. Now, this, of course, is a worldwide problem, and the World Health Organization predicts that by the year 2030, 65.7 million people around the world will have Alzheimer's disease, and that will double to 115.4 million people by 2050. So what do? Well, thankfully, there are physicians who are focused on prevention, which I believe is the best and only way to manage your health effectively. So welcome my guest, Dr. James Greenblatt. Dr. Greenblatt is a pioneer in the field of integrative medicine and currently serves as the Chief Medical Officer at Walden Behavioral Care in Waltham, Massachusetts, and as an Assistant Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at Tufts University School of Medicine and Dartmouth College Geisel School of Medicine. He's an integrative medicine expert, educator, and author, and has lectured internationally on the scientific evidence for nutritional interventions in psychiatry and mental illness. His knowledge in the areas of biology, genetics, psychology, and nutrition as they interact in the treatment of mental illness has made him a highly sought-after speaker. And in April of 2017, Dr. Greenblatt was inducted into the Orthomolecular Medicine Hall of Fame by the International Society of Orthomolecular Medicine, which has recognized significant contributors to science and medicine who operate from the perspective of biochemical individuality and nutrition-based therapies. Fascinating, doctor. It's so nice to have you with us.
Tara, it's great to be here.
Yeah, and I had you, I want to tell people this right out of the gate. If you're new to Tara Marie Live, I actually interviewed you it was my first season. We did a show called, I thought it was fascinating. It was about ADHD. You wrote a book called Finally Focused, A Natural Treatment Plan for ADHD. That was a fascinating book. If you guys want to hear that interview, go to tamry.com, and it's interview number 12, actually. If you go to tamry.com, go to the podcast page, it's episode number 12, Finally Focused with Dr. James Greenblatt. You know, I think, Doctor, what I said last year in the open kind of says it all. When you got you got inducted into the Orthomolecular Medicine Hall of Fame, and it recognizes people who do great work in medicine and science, who operate from the perspective, and this is key, of biochemical individuality and nutrition-based therapies. That's really what your work as an integrative psychiatrist is all about.
Absolutely. That's the core model of integrative psychiatry, and that is I believe, the tragedy of modern medicine, particularly psychiatry. Because in psychiatry, everybody's the same. If you're anxious, everybody takes an anti-anxiety pill. If you're depressed, everyone takes an antidepressant. But for dementia and Alzheimer's, we couldn't find an anti-Alzheimer's pill. So billions of dollars later, we currently have no treatment in our medical model, which is just symptomatic-based medicine, not looking at the cause.
Right. And you actually, the first thing that caught me, first of all, I want to show your book. This is a wonderful book. This book is Integrative Medicine for Alzheimer's Disease. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can catch the video on YouTube. Integrative Medicine for Alzheimer's Disease is the name of the book. It's called The Breakthrough Natural Treatment Plan That Prevents Alzheimer's Disease Using Nutritional Lithium. We're going to get into that heavily. And you also talk about other nutritional protocols. And after I read the book from cover to cover, and I noticed in the dedication you wrote, this book is dedicated to the scientists and clinicians that have challenged the pharmaceutical treatment models of Alzheimer's and have begun to understand that prevention is possible. Do you feel frustrated with your colleagues, with other psychiatrists who have not gotten on board with the idea that prevention is not only possible, but prevention is where we need to be when we think about Alzheimer's disease?
The frustration for me is the neurology community, the psychiatrists, people working with Alzheimer's now in the last 10 years understand that huge gap between preclinical and symptoms. So they understand that prevention is the model. The frustrating part for me is they haven't looked aggressively at some of the nutritional interventions like lithium that we describe in the book.
Okay, so in other words, in the last, say, decade, which in medicine is recent, in terms of medicine, I think a decade is fairly recent, psychiatrists have just kind of come on board with the idea that prevention is where we need to go, because trying to catch it once it's already diagnosed is not possible. But they're not, you're saying where your frustration comes is they're not recognizing all the modalities of prevention. Is that correct?
Yes. So we now have clear evidence that for Alzheimer's, the plaques and tangles and all the kind of the disease modifying properties occur 20 or 30 years before the onset of symptoms.
Okay.
So the individuals treating Alzheimer's understand that, doing the research, and what they say is diet and lifestyle. And what we tried to do in the book is saying there's more evidence than just diet and lifestyle. There are biochemical tests and nutrients that we can do in that 20 or 30 year period to prevent Alzheimer's.
And the other thing is I believe you will agree with this, before we even began rolling today, we were talking to the owner of Hanger Studios, Chad, and he was saying, how, he listens to all my shows and he's learned a lot. And he said, you are what you eat, diet is everything. What I got out of your book is, yes, diet's very important, but the state of, you can't, I don't believe you can get everything from just diet alone. I believe, and I take a lot of supplements, at some point in your life, and it depends on your age and your stage and where you are biochemically and where you are hormonally, you do need to supplement in order to get the level of these nutrients to be protective of your brain. Is that accurate?
No, absolutely. And there are individual differences. That's why a large part of the work that we do is looking at testing. So we're looking at levels of vitamin D and homocysteine and B12, because I see a lot of patients who are eating the perfect diet. They're spending millions of dollars, but they're still deficient. Okay,
so they're trying, they're doing their best, and they're going on the adage, you are what you eat, but it's just not enough. And this is what my family makes fun of me. A lot of people make fun of me because I take a lot of supplements. I feel well, I think clearly, I'm getting good results, the results that I wish, so I continue to do what I want to do. But I know a lot of people are not on board with that idea, because there are a lot of physicians who think that supplements are things you just pee out.
Correct. There's a growing bias against supplements from the medical community, even though the research is increasing dramatically.
Okay, now you're an integrative psychiatrist. Explain to the listeners what this distinction means, and for example, how your assessment and treatment of patients would be different from, say, a conventional psychiatrist. You're an MD, we should say. You're a medical doctor, but you're an integrative MD. How are you different from a more conventional psychiatrist? If I came to you saying that I'm complaining with feelings of, cognitive difficulties, depression, things like that, how do you look at the patient?
Well, as you said earlier, the most important thing is to understand that everyone with the same set of symptoms might have different causes. Okay. So if we take someone who's just forgetting things, so we call it early cognitive decline, rather than just saying, take this pill, an integrative psychiatry would start thinking of all the things that might cause that. Is it a hormone level? Is it a vitamin B12 deficiency? So we take a history, we understand genetics, and we do a lot of what's called functional medicine testing to see if there are deficiencies that are contributing. So it just avoids the current model in psychiatry, which is just symptomatic-based medicine, as I described, just giving a pill for a symptom.
Okay, so conventional psychiatry to this day in 2019 is, doctor, I'm depressed, patient, take this pill. Doctor, I am forgetting things, I'm getting concerned, patient, take this pill. Your way as an integrative psychiatrist would be to say, why is this patient depressed? Why is this patient forgetting things? There's something biochemically going awry here.
Absolutely, yes. And not all the time we can find something, but I think the testing is getting more sophisticated. The research is getting better. So what's frustrating for me is that we do have this information, and most of the time we can find these biochemical, metabolic abnormalities that are contributing to those symptoms.
Well, are doctors like you going to conferences, international and national conferences, and teaching these principles to more conventional psychiatrists? How is this going to spread, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I'm hopeful. I think the younger psychiatrists are looking for this information. So the conferences on integrative health are growing. Mm-hmm. So I am hopeful that our younger doctors are kind of understanding that things should be better. Okay, because because it seems that a lot of there are among physicians, among MDs, there seem to be these two camps, and I'm wondering what would bridge the gap. What would bridge the gap to get better health care? What would It is the division among medicine is still very strong. There are people who talk about supplements being harmful without ever reading anything, taking or knowing anything about it. Mm-hmm. Others are kind of the other way. So there are different camps, but I do think the younger doctors are searching this information out. Conferences are getting bigger, and the research is supporting things that we've said in this field for 30, 40 years. We now have good research from academic communities around the world supporting this stuff.
And also, I think patient demand will turn the tide. I think if patients get educated and patients know what to look for and ask for, they'll start seeking out doctors that agree with them. I always go to doctors that think as I do. And if I find a doctor that poo-poos my philosophy, I just go to another doctor. I don't stick around.
So, there's a growing number of what we call integrative doctors. The psychiatric community is still small. Okay. And we have a lot more work to do.
Now, doctor, this book is about Alzheimer's disease. Give just a definition of Alzheimer's disease, because I think a lot of people get confused about Alzheimer's disease, other forms of dementia.
Sure. Yeah. Alzheimer's is a form of irreversible brain damage called dementia. Okay. So Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. Okay. There are other kinds of medical illnesses that can contribute to dementia, whether it's vascular blood pressure problems. Yes. And numerous other neurological disorders that can contribute to dementia. But Alzheimer's is just one form right now. It's the most common.
The most common, didn't you say in the book 60 to 80% of dementia cases are Alzheimer's?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, and define dementia. In other words, with dementia, you have loss of cognitive function. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, the brain controls everything. So it
Okay.
starts with concerns around memory, and then as the kind of brain destruction take its toll, losing track of time, able to care for oneself, and then it starts affecting one's physical health, like breathing and swallowing, and that's why the death rate is high, often within 6 or 8 years.
So yeah, and you say in the beginning of the book, you give some very startling statistics. You noted that in 2012, so that's 7 years ago, Alzheimer's disease affected 35.6 million people worldwide, and the World Health Organization, as I said in the open, predicts that this number will double every 20 years. So again, we're going to jump to 65.7 million by 2030, which is just kind of around the corner, and by 115.4 million by 2050. And you said that every 4 seconds in the world, someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. What do you think is going on with the alarming rise? Because it can't be genetic, because our gene pool hasn't changed, but these diseases are going up and up and up. I have a theory as to what I think it is, but I want to know what you think it is.
Well, I think it's probably a combination of anything you and I could think about all coming together.
Mm-hmm.
So the brain is our most vulnerable organ because it's a fatty organ, which means lots of toxins in the environment can kind of bind to fat.
Okay.
So I think our diet, our health, the environment, and as the population ages. So the combination of all those factors, I think, are contributing to the rise, not just of Alzheimer's, but all the neurodegenerative illnesses that tend to be increasing.
And you say that Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, meaning once it begins, it just continues to get worse, and the patient progresses through various stages. And the Mayo Clinic identified 5 different stages in the book that you write about. But you do say that people with Alzheimer's disease from time of diagnosis tend to live 8 to 10 years. And you alluded to this previously, and that's because the brain helps us with different bodily functions. Because I always thought that someone with Alzheimer's disease, their mind was going, but their bodies were still quite strong.
You know, that 6 to 8 years is kind of an average. So there are individuals. I had an aunt who was 25 years in a nursing home, demented the entire time.
Okay.
But the average is that 6 to 8 years. Some people much more rapidly. But for many people, the brain destruction is very rapid, and then it takes over one able to care for self, feed self, then you get malnutrition, more prone to infections.
Okay.
And usually pneumonia, urinary tract infections would be what someone would
Why pneumonia, doctor? I didn't understand.
Some of the swallowing. So the brain controls our swallowing.
Okay.
So they're chewing on something and it goes down the bronchial tubes rather than the stomach.
So it's aspiration pneumonia.
Could be.
Yes. Okay. Now, stage 1, I thought this was interesting. Stage 1 in the stages identified by the Mayo Clinic is called the preclinical stage. It has no outward signs, but you say that imaging techniques can identify brain changes, including beta amyloid protein deposits that are markers of brain damage. First of all, I was behind the times because I thought at one time, is it not true that you could not diagnose Alzheimer's disease? You could not see it in the brain until time of autopsy. Am I wrong with that?
Well, currently that's our only model because we do not do PET scans on everybody, and it's not a routine part of our medical practice. So currently, the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is really simply based on a list of symptoms.
Okay, so what you say here that imaging techniques can pick up the preclinical stage, that would be a PET scan or a functional MRI?
We can pick up both, can pick up amyloid, but a lot of people have amyloid and never get Alzheimer's. So it's not an accurate way of looking at that progression. And that's what the core part of the book is, because there's so many other factors that we can look at during that preclinical phase to that onset, which we know could be 20 or 30 years.
I didn't even say like sometimes 40 years, which is scary to me. Like, so someone in their 30s is setting the stage for Alzheimer's disease.
But to me, the reason I use those numbers is more hopeful. Because if we start doing things early, it's pretty clear we can make a dent in this illness.
Well, what I wanted to ask you was, since in the preclinical stage, when there are absolutely no outward signs, but these imaging techniques can pick up on the brain changes, would there be any value to doing imaging, the screenings, just like we do a colonoscopy and and women do mammograms? Would there be a value to, say, baseline at 40 to do a baseline brain image so we can...
It's a healthcare financial argument that in some ways might make sense, but it's just not part of our medical model at this time.
But wouldn't that be cheaper than the money we're spending on Alzheimer's? I mean,
when you think of the trillions, I think the numbers that we are spending for caring for patients with dementia, there absolutely is a cost kind of benefit to as early diagnosis as we can.
So what would that look like? So in other words, if we were, you go in for screening, I'm just speaking hypothetically, you go in for screening, baseline age 40, and this would speak to the value of integrative psychiatry. You go in for your baseline and you notice the brain scans, and then as the physician, you could say, look, this doesn't indicate that you're definitely going to get Alzheimer's disease, but with the way your brain looks, it looks like you may be in the preclinical stage. Let's look at homocysteine, vitamin D, B6, B12, blah, blah, blah. Let's get you on a protocol now.
It certainly is logical and it makes sense. It's kind of hard. I don't think we have the science yet to know those early scans that would say Alzheimer's or not. And that's why hopefully the kinds of testing that we're talking about would be more cost effective and easier to do that everybody could do at age 40.
Okay, but again, it would be MRI or PET scan if that's...
Right, and it might not pick up all the amyloid. So you need a special scan to pick up amyloid. So they have to be kind of dyed, and it's not routinely done. And it's research.
Oh, you have to do dye? Oh, you have to...
Yeah. On a simple PET scan, you would not pick up amyloid. So you'd have to mark it.
So you're talking about imaging that's only used for research. They're not really used on average patients.
Right.
Oh, I see. So this is a lot more complicated.
Yes.
I get it. Now, I wanted to ask you this because, again, I have my own theories, but do you think that there's a correlation between increasing rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes and the skyrocketing rates of Alzheimer's disease? Because I've always heard that type 2 diabetes, or rather Alzheimer's disease, is just called type 3 diabetes.
There's actually growing research to demonstrate that point, that abnormal blood sugar regulation is part of one of the risk factors and some of the pathology. It doesn't explain all the pathology in Alzheimer's, but it certainly, there's research to support that theory.
And it would support it via the vascular damage route, correct? Because again, the reason I'm assuming Alzheimer's disease is called type 3 diabetes is because of the vascular damage to the brain. So is that why?
It would be all the complications of elevated blood sugar, so chronically high blood sugar, and vascular damage would be one part of that. Got it.
Because what I've noticed is I've been alive long enough to see very interesting trends in, if you've been alive I've been alive since 65. So, right around mid-70s was, interestingly, when high fructose corn syrup got embraced by the food industry. Isn't that interesting? And that's also when artificial sweeteners came out. I was given my first diet soda when I was 10 in 1975. I just think it feels to me like right around the mid-70s, we started setting the stage to go off the rails. And now look where we are 45 years later.
No, absolutely. Some of the diet industry, between the artificial sweeteners and you mentioned the high fructose corn syrup, certainly had wreaked havoc for our obesity epidemic and has not done well in terms of brain function and the onslaught of increasing neurodegenerative illness. Right.
And what's interesting is in that 45 years since the mid-70s, it's just interesting to me that it takes about that much time for all, that's a whole generation of people now are my age, and look at us.
Yeah, our health, and in my world, mental health rates are increasing dramatically in terms of depression, anxiety, and the suicide epidemic. Is just another reflection of the way our lifestyle, be it diet, exercise, genetics, all interacting to make very fragile, vulnerable brains.
Also chemicals in the environment that are acting as neurotoxins.
Absolutely.
I believe, yeah.
Yes.
Now, do you think that there's a correlation? This came from my director, Rich. We've heard that there is a correlation between aluminum toxicity and Alzheimer's disease?
There was some early research, mostly in animals, and people started looking at it. I think in the human clinical trials, there's not enough research to make a direct correlation between aluminum and Alzheimer's. But I think with all the heavy metals and toxins in our environment, it does fuel a similar kind of neurochemistry where there's lots of inflammation, lots of oxidation. So it might use up a lot of the antioxidants and nutrients that the brain needs for optimal function.
Well, and also like with little children who have lead poisoning, it affects their learning, it affects their cognitive function. So we know that heavy metals do affect our cognition.
The lead is just a perfect example of something at very, very low levels having irreversible brain damage with our kids. So there's no reason not to assume that would affect adults. And some of the other metals like aluminum and copper, which is in our water supply, also affects the brain.
So the conclusion when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and heavy metal toxicity, including aluminum, is the jury's still out, but you feel like the arrows do point in that direction, that it's not doing anything good for the brain.
Correct. And now, in some of the testing that we do, we're able to look for heavy metals. So some individuals are going to have high levels of copper, mercury, lead, and we can see that.
Mm-hmm.
But someone else with early cognitive decline might not. So again, everyone's different,
right?
And that is genetic, environment is going to affect who accumulates these heavy metals and who doesn't,
and how they affect us. Yeah,
correct.
Now you say that in less than 5% of cases. So I thought this was good news when I read it. In less than 5% of cases, Alzheimer's disease results from a specific genetic vulnerability that makes a person more likely to develop the disease. So this is to say then that in 95% of cases, it's more about how we live and what we're doing to our bodies than anything else.
Correct. And, people are obsessed with the 23andMe and the ancestry and the testing, looking for some of these genes. And for some people, getting either misinformation or frightening information. So there is some genes that give us higher risk for Alzheimer's, but it's not, our genes are not our destiny. It's just this vulnerability.
Right. And so right there, you're referring to the wonderful field of epigenetics.
Right.
So I'd like you to go further into that, because again, I get very sad when I hear people say, well, this runs in my family, and they almost take an approach like they're just doomed. And it's almost like they haven't heard about epigenetics. Because see, I never really, my grandfather, my mother's father, died in a nursing home out of his mind with dementia. He also smoked since he was a teenager. He drank a lot of soda. He drank a lot of, sugar and soda. He didn't eat or live the way I live. And so I understand that perhaps my nervous system is more vulnerable to those things, but I don't feel like it's my fate. So talk about epigenetics, because I want you to give people hope who feel like they're genetically inclined toward this or any one of a number of horrible diseases.
Sure. So as I said, the genes kind of predict some liability, not our destiny. And epigenetics is what controls the genes. So epigenetics are those factors in our environment that either can turn on or turn off the gene. And a lot of the nutrients that we talk about in this Alzheimer's book are nutrients that affect genes.
Okay.
Vitamin D, lithium, they affect many, many genes that can turn off genes and turn on genes. And this is kind of the power of changing lifestyle, changing diet. And that is what gives me hope that we actually can make some real changes.
Right, because your genes lay out the potential for what may happen to you, but you make the decision as to what actually does.
Correct.
More or less. Okay, so you write in the book, and I thought this is where I get into a lot of conversations with people. This creates a lot of confusion. You write in the book that despite years and years of clinical trials, there currently, to this day, right now, is no medication that is effective in preventing the progression of Alzheimer's disease. In 2014, you say that researchers found that of 244 drugs studied for Alzheimer's disease, only one was approved. You go into great explanation about this in the book as to why we failed so miserably to come up with a drug, that could prevent, slow down, cure.
We're continuing to fail. Recently, within the last couple of months, another $1 billion investment in a drug company was stopped because the drug was not helpful for Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. So we're getting 2 or 3 a year failures of these drugs, front page headline, then they disappear, because there are other kind of now high-tech pharm companies looking at new drugs, because the potential is billions of dollars.
Right.
And so that's what people are investing their research dollars in. But we've continued to demonstrate that we're just unable to do it with a model of treating a very, very degenerative brain illness.
And you say in the book, like, for example, there have been drugs that have targeted, and we're going to get into more of the details of Alzheimer's disease, but there have been drugs that have targeted the plaques that seem to do harm to our brain. There are drugs those didn't work. So then the doctor said, well, maybe it's not the plaques and the tangles that are giving us Alzheimer's disease. Maybe it's the level of acetylcholine. So they're trying to sort of chase after. I think the reason they failed is because they're trying to chase after and figure out what exactly precisely is causing it and target that. And in your book, you explain there's so many factors that create the end result of dementia, Alzheimer's disease.
And it just takes looking at a picture of an Alzheimer's brain for anybody, a 12-year-old, to appreciate the fact that it's probably close to impossible to reverse that atrophy and that cell loss that happens with end-stage Alzheimer's. So again, the hope is when we have a normal brain that we can look at those factors to prevent all this neuropathology, the plaques and the tangles and the inflammation that define this illness.
And also when you have Alzheimer's disease, the brain shrinks, correct? It physically shrinks in size.
Correct.
Okay, so so it's like they're trying to find a drug that's going to grow a brain, and that's, now, Chapter 5, I love this book. It's so simple to read, and it gives such practical advice. All of Chapter 5 is dedicated to the mineral lithium, which you say was found in 1952 in Denmark to effectively treat bipolar disorder. And you write that in October of 2000, a research team here in the United States at Wayne State University School of Medicine made a very fortuitous accidental discovery. What was that discovery?
Well, lithium actually goes back 13.8 billion years.
Okay, because it's a mineral.
It's a mineral that's one of the first elements in the Big Bang Theory. Okay. So it's a natural mineral in the earth. And what happened in 2000 is they were able to demonstrate that lithium was able to protect neurons. So it prevented the destruction of brain cells. And the research over the years were both in animal studies and human studies that lithium can prevent the destruction of brain tissue and can actually help support what's called neuroregeneration, help grow some of the brain cells. And that has been kind of growing research in both animal and human studies, and really kind of revolutionary because we don't have medicines that can do that, but now we have a nutrient that can do it.
Yes, but as you say in the book so eloquently, it's not going to bring in a lot of money to the pharmaceutical companies. So
lithium might cost pennies a day for someone to purchase, which means there's not a profit margin. So nobody's going to do the research and nobody's going to invest in it.
And so you say that taking lithium, adults' patients' brains were regenerating cells as evidenced on an MRI. So you say that this can not only prevent us from developing Alzheimer's disease, but am I hearing you say that you can reverse, at least in the early stages, like if you catch someone in the very early stages of dementia, it can reverse it? It has that kind of power?
There's not a lot of studies, but there's certainly a few studies where low-dose lithium giving for 15 months over the course of a year. And after 3 or 4 months, they were able to kind of arrest the downward spiral. So it can stop Alzheimer's progressive deterioration.
Okay.
And, based on the work that we've been doing and talking to doctors around the country, there are many doctors who have shared with me some improvement in patients who've also been on this.
Got it. So it can not only prevent it, it seems like it can arrest the progression. And again, Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease, so it ain't going to get better. And you're saying that you've seen some cognitive improvement. Obviously not back to ground, not back to maybe perhaps not back to normal where the person was, but at least cognitive improvement.
Right. The better research is in the prevention. And we see this in patients with bipolar illness who've taken lithium. Okay. They have lower rates of Alzheimer's. And in some of the studies of lithium in the water supply. So the best research is in the prevention of dementia and Alzheimer's. We're just dabbling in, and as you described, it's not going to be robust research because there's no money for anyone to get any pharmaceutical income on the other side.
Now, explain the dose-response relationship and why people need to understand this to understand why it is safe to take low-dose lithium, because you do spend a good bit of time talking in the book about the people's hesitancy to take lithium because of toxicity that has occurred using higher doses. And we're the kind of, a lot of times people, they hear something about, and they close their mind to the details.
Sure.
But so explain the dose-response relationship and why we have to understand this to understand that it is safe to take low dose.
Sure. I mean, lithium has a stigma.
Yeah.
And I have patients who would take any medication from me, even antipsychotics, but wouldn't take lithium just because of the stigma associated with it.
Right.
And lithium as a prescription medicine can have concerning side effects. Kidney damage, thyroid damage. And these are dosages 1,500, 1,800 milligrams.
Is that like what you would give a bipolar patient?
Correct.
Okay.
So we do worry about those side effects, and I rarely give those dosages anymore. But nutritional lithium is in our soil, which means it's in our water supply. And we have research going back 30 years now from around the world, of 20 different countries. The first studies were in Texas in the United States. Mm-hmm. And the amount of lithium in the drinking water,
yes,
just in the drinking water, has such a significant effect that the rates of suicide were dramatically shifted. So if the lithium is high in the drinking water, mm-hmm. we're talking about micrograms of lithium, then the suicide rates were low. If lithium was very, very low, the suicide rates were high. So a very tiny amount of lithium affected brain function, specifically suicide. And they repeated the same study in Greece, in Italy, in England, in Lithuania was the last one a few years ago. And they've all said the same thing. So to me, it's just such a powerful reflection of this low-dose lithium affecting brain function.
I didn't know that lithium was in drinking water until I read your book. I did not know that. But you also mentioned in the book that in areas, in regions in this country where lithium was in drinking water, that crime rates were lower.
In some of the studies that looked at crime rates, aggression, homicide, rape, yes.
Yeah. Is lithium in the drink, like today, if we...
Well, we're all drinking bottled water now, so we've kind of thrown out tap water, and the bottled water does not have the same amounts of lithium. There are companies that are selling lithiated water for that reason, but a lot of the bottled water doesn't have the same amount of lithium.
But by dose-response relationship, the main thing I got out of that part of the book is people need to, again, you're talking about little, like 1 milligram, 2 milligrams. That's what you're talking about. You're not talking about the amount that someone with bipolar disorder 30 years ago would have been prescribed.
Correct. So what we might get from our water or our food would be around 1 milligram a day.
Yeah.
So I'm recommending if we're in our 40s, taking like 2.5 milligrams of lithium. If we begin to have symptoms, maybe higher 5 milligrams. So it is a tiny amount versus what I mentioned earlier, 1,500 milligrams, which is a drug.
Yeah.
5 milligrams is a nutrient.
Do you think the stigma, I never heard of lithium until I had a friend who had bipolar disorder. This was back in the early 90s when I was living here, when I first moved here. And do you think that the stigma is also not so much attached to possibly the kidney damage and the thyroid damage, but that people are going to think you have this? The stigma is really the stigma against bipolar disorder.
Yes.
Because I have to tell you, I went in and I did a little surgery, an oral surgery, and I had to write down for the doctor all the supplements I'm taking and all the prescription medications. And so I take lithium orotate, the supplement, and I just wrote down lithium 5 milligrams, that kind of thing. And he said to me, lithium, he goes, do you have bipolar disorder? And I said, no, it's lithium orotate. It's nutritional lithium. And he was a doctor. He had no idea. So I think that the stigma isn't that people are worried about kidney disease and thyroid disease. I think they just don't want people to think they have bipolar disorder, which I don't understand the stigma around that either.
Yeah, absolutely. The stigma of mental illness and bipolar disorder is profound and does affect people from beginning to look at lithium as perhaps a preventative agent for dementia.
Now, so if lithium is in fact a possible answer, because the main thing I got out of your book is not only are there nutritional interventions, vitamin D, B6, and we're going to get into all those. But lithium is really, if you're only going to do one thing, if somebody says, I'm not willing to make a bunch of changes, the one change I would suggest is adding lithium, low-dose lithium. If that is in fact a possible answer to the worldwide Alzheimer's disease crisis that's going to bankrupt us, I mean, we're screwed. We're in a pickle. Why is the whole medical community, why aren't you out at conferences standing on stages begging people to get on board with this?
Well, I think that the tide is changing. People are getting more open to it. There was a psychiatrist who read all this research, and she wrote an editorial in the New York Times probably about 5 years ago. And she said, why aren't we putting lithium in the drinking water the way we put fluoride or other things? And the backlash and the response, people just didn't understand it. And she was just completely kind of chewed up on as a response to her editorial. But it was just based on the facts that I wrote about in the book and the simple premise that these low dosages can have profound implications.
And even if we were drinking bottled water, the fact is if it were in our drinking water, we're brushing our teeth with it, we're probably cooking with it, that kind of thing. It would make its way in. So basically what I hear you saying is you are shouting it from the rooftops. It's just some people don't want to hear it at this time.
I think a lot of doctors read this material. It's hard not to take it. It's just getting the information out. It's one of the reasons we wrote the book, and also trying to get more research done to kind of ascertain how we can best make this part of our model of prevention.
And explain to everybody how lithium actually protects the brain against Alzheimer's disease.
Well, that's probably an 8-hour discussion and very technical. There's lots of things that lithium does in the brain. It affects inflammation. It increases the most powerful antioxidant in the brain, glutathione. Mm-hmm. It decreases some neurotransmitters that cause neurotoxicity, like glutamate. And there's a whole bunch of what's called peptides that are really important for brain growth and neuronal growth that lithium increases, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor and NAA. So lithium, the list is so long and so impressive. It's almost kind of too good to be true when you read the science behind how lithium can support brain function. There are companies, biotech companies, looking at just one of the things that lithium does, which is decrease this enzyme called GSK3. And they're developing drugs to do that
to
one
mimic
thing.
It.
And lithium is a natural molecule that does that.
And also lithium has other benefits. Lithium has multiple ways that it enhances brain health. And also it works at a very, very, very low dose, and there's no toxicity, as you indicated.
At the doses we're talking about, 1, 2, 5 milligrams, not seeing any side effects or any problems. We would not recommend it for someone with chronic kidney disease, but other than that, it would not be a problem.
Now, there are trace amounts of lithium in food, and you list in the book seafood, meats, legumes, vegetables, grains, and nuts. But you say that to get the neuroprotective benefits, you really recommend taking a supplement that you can purchase in most health food stores. I actually started taking lithium after I read the book that I interviewed you on last year, Finally Focused for ADHD, because I know that you use it in protocols with children or adults with ADHD. It seems to me like lithium is like this nice little adaptogen for the brain, that whatever's off, lithium just kind of balances it, you know?
Absolutely. The ADHD book is a little more fun than the Alzheimer's book because I don't get a lot of emails because the Alzheimer's takes so long. But I get emails every week about parents who've put their children, particularly with the irritability and aggression with ADHD, where they've seen dramatic changes in just short periods of time on lithium.
And what should we consider when buying a lithium supplement? And I, full disclosure, you work with Pure Encapsulations.
Correct.
And so I went and I bought lithium orotate, 5 milligram capsules by Pure Encapsulations. What are some things to consider insofar as, because you mentioned there's lithium orotate, there's lithium, isn't there citrate?
Citrate is the liquid form. And for kids, you want to do a lower dose than the 5 milligrams. So the liquid forms, you can get 500 micrograms as a half a dropper. So we use either the liquid. I think that over 5 milligrams probably should be talking to a healthcare professional to make sure there's no other contraindications. But from 1 to 5 milligrams, I think it's absolutely safe and important to consider in the prevention of dementia or Alzheimer's.
So for adults who can take the 1 to 5 milligrams, you recommend lithium orotate?
The citrate is for the liquid. The orotate comes in either 2.5 or 5 milligrams. 2.5
or 5 milligrams. And how can one test for lithium need? You do mention a hair tissue mineral analysis and a urine test.
Yes, the urine test is new. I have not used it. New laboratory came up with that. But I've been looking at the same hair mineral test for 30 years.
Okay.
And we can detect levels of lithium in the hair. When I started this 30 years ago, I would say there was a 10-15% of individuals that were low in lithium, and now probably 40-50%. So something's happening. Either
could it be the soil? The soil's changing?
Either the soil or other kinds of toxins get in the way, or our bottled water obsession. But either way, we're seeing much more hair samples of undetectable lithium. And that kind of guides our treatment, because within a few months of lithium supplements, we can see the hair levels rise.
Now, I didn't know that we were supposed to have detectable levels of lithium in, so you can't test this with blood, correct? You cannot.
Correct.
You cannot.
Right.
Okay. So I didn't even know that we were supposed to have that, so when you do this test, there's like a reference range that says you should be between 40 and 150, and anything lower than 40 is deficient. It's just like blood work. It's almost
correct.
Like that.
Yep.
And so I wanted to let people know that the hair tissue mineral analysis kit that you recommend is by Great Plains Laboratory. You can get that at greatplainslaboratory.com. greatplainslaboratory.com. And you said the urine test is on zrtlab.com. But the Great Plains Laboratory, the hair test, it's simple. Like you do it at home. You order it, correct? You cut hair from different little sites on your head, and you send it to them. And then when you get the results back, you can just take that to a functional medicine doctor, an integrative medicine doctor like you?
Yes, most of the time the labs require a doctor to order it.
Okay, so it would start with going to a doctor like you.
Start with going to the doctor, and it looks for heavy metals. So we're going to look at mercury and lead and copper, and it's going to look for magnesium and zinc. But lithium is just one of the 20 or 30 different elements that we look at.
And I don't know if I saw in the book, with patients, is there a trend like people who are low in lithium have an X percentage greater chance of getting Alzheimer's disease? I don't recall reading.
We don't really have that research.
But you have the research that it helps it.
Correct.
You have the research that it helps prevent it, stop progression, and even perhaps to a small extent reverse it.
Yes.
This is breaking my heart because I have a girlfriend who her mother died. She had Alzheimer's disease, and I remember this was years ago. But they tried Aricept, that drug that I believe it helps get rid of the plaques and tangles. I think that's what it does, and it didn't do much.
Most of the medications that we currently now have for Alzheimer's, are affecting levels of acetylcholine, which you mentioned, and most people have not had benefits. They've been very, very slight, and side effects.
We've talked about the plaques and tangles. Explain quickly. I realize we didn't explain what that is. The plaques are just plaque deposits in the brain.
If you think of the two cells in the brain, two neurons, and there's a little space between each neuron, and the cells communicate by sending chemicals between that, what's called the synapse. So plaques are the beta amyloid, these proteins that kind of goo up the space between the cells, so the communication starts getting garbled. So the cells don't talk well to each other.
Okay.
And then the tangles, the other kind of hallmark features, are kind of what's happening in the cell. And so these tubules in the cell, which distribute nutrients and keep the cells healthy, get all tangled up. And so we have problems with cells communicating and problems within the cells getting enough nutrients. And then we just get this cell destruction that just becomes progressive and cells just die.
Okay, so cells have trouble communicating. Cells don't get the correct nutrition. And then they eventually die. The brain atrophies.
And the third part of that equation would be inflammation. Based on that, those plaques, then our body sees it as, well, we have to do something. So it's this inflammatory response. So we start producing all these inflammatory chemicals
in the brain.
And it's kind of those three hallmarks of this disorder: the plaques, the tangles, and inflammation.
And the inflammation. And again, the inflammation is the body's attempt to help you rid yourself of the plaques.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just like a vicious cycle. So you say that before, going back to lithium, so you said general dosage recommendations, and you said this in the book about ADHD. You said that most people who don't have like a kidney disease or such, over 40 should be taking 5 milligrams of lithium orotate a day just preventively. That would be a dose.
1 to 5 milligrams. Yeah.
1 to 5 milligrams. And of course, ask your doctor. You don't want to do that willy-nilly. But like I said, I started doing it. And you also say that before starting low-dose lithium, screen for thyroid disorders. Is it because if you have a thyroid disorder, you should not take it, or?
We haven't found any thyroid abnormalities with people taking this low-dose lithium. But since there is that theoretical problem with higher-dose lithium,
right,
I just want everyone to have a screening test to make sure that they're checking for their thyroid before they would start something like this.
Right, because I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I've talked about that before in the show with low thyroid, and I take my low-dose lithium, and it has not affected my thyroid values
Correct.
at all. So I get you. You're saying if you do have a thyroid disorder, just monitor the thyroid disorder, make sure it's not getting worse.
Correct.
And people with kidney disease absolutely should not take lithium, and that's...
Correct.
And why is that, doctor?
Because lithium, certainly prescription lithium, causes destruction of the kidney. And if someone has poor functioning kidneys, you wouldn't want to do anything that would contribute to the damage.
So someone with kidney disease couldn't even take low dose, 1 to 2 milligrams?
Well, if you don't tell your kidney doctor, it's probably safe. But I think it's too complicated to make, because I had a patient whose kidney doctor, she couldn't take regular lithium. She took lithium orotate.
Okay.
Completely changed her mood. She had severe depressive illness. The kidney doctor found out she stopped it. Her mood changed. She went back on it without telling either me or her kidney doctor, and she did fine, and her kidney function hadn't changed for years.
I think what I would do in that case is monitor kidney value, monitor your kidney function throughout the year. Just like I monitor my thyroid function throughout the year, 3 times a year, continue to monitor your kidney function. And
I've done that for many, many years with patients, and I've never seen it affect kidney function.
Okay. And you also say in the book, if you're pregnant, lactating, this is not something you want to take.
I would not recommend any nutritional lithium for someone who's pregnant.
Okay. So you dedicate part 4 of the book the whole part to discussing other nutritional support for Alzheimer's disease. And you begin this section by highlighting the dangers of high homocysteine levels in the blood. And you said that high homocysteine can double the risk of Alzheimer's disease. That makes me perk up my ears. Explain to everybody, what is homocysteine and why is it so damaging as regards brain health?
Sure. The reason why this is so important is because traditional medicine, our traditional medical colleagues have done all the research.
Okay.
And they're the ones who have this information. And that's why I'm hopeful that it'll get discussed more. We had, in 2002, there was research looking at high homocysteine. It was a Framingham heart study, having double the risk of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in 2018, right, 16 years later, an international group of physicians got together from around the world and put together all the research we have. And they came up with this called consensus paper that reiterated this fact that high homocysteine affects rates of dementia, and we need to aggressively decrease levels of homocysteine. It was a traditional medical journal, profound implications, but it is not translated into routine medical care.
Okay, see, so I always knew that high homocysteine was correlated with stroke and heart disease, right?
Correct.
I think most people knew that. I think all doctors knew that. I didn't know till reading your book that it was correlated with Alzheimer's disease. I'm not understanding as to why all physicians aren't on board. That's a simple little blood test. I mean, that's just you.
It's a simple test, and the implications are profound when we talk about numbers like doubling risk of Alzheimer's.
So what is your suspicion as to why doctors are not jumping on board with this?
I've given up trying to understand the medical culture as to why, particularly when we have the research. Most of the time in my world, doctors are saying, we need more research. But the homocysteine information based on this consensus group, which put together hundreds of references, is clear.
Okay, so if someone has, all right, so you talk in the book, you give a lot of information about how to lower homocysteine levels, and all of the ways that you offer to do it are very doable. They're very easy. It's supplementation. You say folic acid or L-methylfolate. You could explain that. Folic acid, obviously you say in the book, folic acid for all of us, if we have a special gene mutation, we don't convert it into the form that we need to protect our brains.
Sure. To bring down homocysteine, it's very simple and it's very inexpensive.
Right.
Folate, B6, and B12.
Okay.
So the blood test showing someone has high homocysteine gives us, step one. But it's also good to try to understand which vitamin might be the contributing factor.
Okay.
So we're going to look at a B12 level. We're going to look at that folate and the folate gene, and we'll look at B6. For some individuals, we give all three. For other individuals, we use very high doses of one, because only one of those vitamins could be the contributing factor, and it's important to know why.
And explain to everybody why some people don't respond well to just folic acid. Because I actually had the test, and I have the gene mutation, it's the MTHFR gene.
Yep.
Yeah, I have the MTHFR gene mutation. And so I think you said 30% of us do. 30% of the population has this mutation, and if we do, we won't absorb the folic acid correctly. We need to take the methylated form. Is that accurate?
Well, you absorb the folate, but
it's
like 8 different steps from the folate in your food
to the brain
to the form that crosses the blood-brain barrier.
Got it.
And for all those steps, it's that last step to get your body to produce L-methylfolate that if you have one of these gene variants,
yes,
for each one you have 35% less conversion. So let's say you have what's called the TT. You have 70% less conversion to L-methylfolate. That's what brings homocysteine down. That's what increases synthesis of all the major neurotransmitters in the brain. And your body needs more if you're under stress, if you drink alcohol, if you're obese. So depending on that kind of gene-environmental interaction is how much folate you need, and very important to determine if that's causing high homocysteine.
And if you do have the gene mutation, which this is all done by blood test, it's not it's easy to do. You do it all in one blood test, basically.
Yes.
You take blood and the lab does it. Then if you do have that gene mutation, you need methylated. You need L-methylfolate versus folic acid because, for example, for someone like me, my body doesn't convert it, so I need the
Correct.
methylated form.
Yes.
And this is all explained in the book. This is very well explained in the book. And I always heard that a B12 deficiency can contribute to cognitive decline. I didn't know it was because it raised homocysteine. I didn't understand that.
It's one of the factors. B12 is also has a number of other, and I've used the term a lot in my lectures, that one of the single greatest tragedies of modern psychiatry is not looking and understanding how to treat low B12.
But so many people have low B12 as they get older.
Yes. All the antacids that we're taking, the stress that we're under. You mentioned metformin, lowering B12. It is very, and there's genetic reasons people might be low in B12. It is very common and it's really simple to treat, but we see early memory problems, early cognitive decline just based on B12.
And also B12, a lot of people eat plant-based diets, so they're not getting...
Most common reason is probably the vegan, vegetarian kind of phase for some individuals. Some do okay, but many get deficient in B12.
And also a lot of people who aren't vegans or vegetarians, they eat the meat, but as they get older, their body isn't able to digest and extract nutrients as well. Isn't that accurate?
Correct. The amount of acid in our stomachs decrease as we get older, and you need acid to break down the animal products to get the B12 out.
Wow. Okay. But see, but what I liked about this book was it's all good news because anybody can take folic acid or L-methylfolate. Anybody can take B6 or B12. These are all things anybody can do, and it's not expensive, and it's not prescription medications. So to me, this is good news. You also write about other vitamins and nutrients that protect the brain against developing Alzheimer's disease, and the greatest of all of these was vitamin D, and you wrote, quote, "There's increasing evidence that aging is not a singular process. Rather, aging is driven by a host of cellular processes, all of which are regulated to some extent by vitamin D. Yet the vast majority of us are vitamin D deficient. And so if you're vitamin D deficient, you're screwed. Right? I mean,
it's another example of the traditional medical community now is publishing a lot of information saying we have adequate vitamin D or we shouldn't be taking supplements. And what they're basing that on is giving 100 people or 1,000 people a vitamin D supplement and saying, well, they don't have less cancer, heart disease, or Alzheimer's. But what they're missing is what the core premise of all the work is of integrative psychiatry is that there's a subset of individuals that have low vitamin D, which causes inflammation, poor neurotransmitter, whole host of other problems. And that group is what is at high risk for dementia and other problems. Not everybody with dementia have low vitamin D. And that's what's been hard for the research community to embrace.
But is it fair to say that not everybody with dementia or cancer or this or that or the other has low vitamin D, but everybody with low vitamin D has some disease process going on? I mean,
increases risk is what we could say. Absolutely. Increases risk for depression, for Alzheimer's. We've seen what's called very, very low vitamin D levels, undetectable vitamin D of individuals. And as soon as the levels increase, we get significant improvement in mental health symptoms.
Wow. See, and that's easy again. That's a supplement.
I mean, the nice thing about this book versus some of the other work that we're doing with their more expensive tests, you're absolutely right. We're talking about inexpensive tests, inexpensive supplements having profound implications for brain health.
Okay. You also list curcumin, which is found in the spice turmeric. You say it protects neurons against the effect of aging and slows the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And you tell a story about how in India, where they use a lot of turmeric, it has one of the worldwide lowest incidence of Alzheimer's disease. Is that correct?
Absolutely. When we can incorporate some of these herbs in our foods, we're always doing better than taking supplements. And we have thousands of references over the years from around the world on curcumin and brain function as an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. And now there's some growing research looking at supplements for the prevention of dementia and cognitive decline. So it's, again, simple, safe, cost-effective, no possible side effects. Research to support.
And I take a curcumin supplement, and you mentioned that you have to take and you go into detail about this in the book. You've got a lot of supplements. Just because you take a supplement doesn't mean you're extracting what you're expecting to extract. It's not necessarily highly bioavailable, meaning available to the tissues of the body. So you want to take a supplement that is bioavailable.
Yes, for the curcumin, you want either a supplement that's kind of embedded in a fat molecule. Mm-hmm. Some people even describe opening their supplements and taking it with olive oil because it's better absorbed with fat. Okay. Or some of the supplements also add the pepper. So the chemical pepper helps absorption of curcumin thousands of fold. So you just want a high quality supplement where you can look at the research around absorption. You don't specifically address this in the book, but I do want to ask you about it because I eat a very high-fat diet, and I noticed there was a time in my life back in the early 90s when I was living in California and the Pritikin diet was big, and we were all doing it, everybody where I worked at a health spa in California, and I've never been so unhealthy as when I had a very, 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 very low fat diet. I find that when I'm on a low fat diet, I'm very prone to depression. I don't think clearly. My mind is like, I can't keep a thought in my head. Do you have a feeling about that? Because I feel like a very high-fat diet, and I mean lots of avocados and olive oil and nuts and seeds and coconut oil and, even beef and chicken and turkey, it helps balance my brain. And I think it helps brain health. I think when you say I have a feeling, I have lots of feelings because I agree with you 100%. And there's people who've written books on the high-fat diets or on the coconut oil with improvement in brain function. We don't have great research to support it, but I think it makes physiological sense. Yeah. And the brain just does better with a higher fat diet. And I'm just saying, I do everything anecdotally. If I eat a certain way and I feel better, and this is not rocket science. And my mother, I think I told you this back when we did the ADHD show. My mother died of progressive supranuclear palsy, which is in the Parkinson's family. Which is, and my mother always dieted and I don't think she gave herself the proper nutrition or enough fat. I think that I think it really sets you up for a lot of neurological problems if you go really, 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 really low fat. I'm a lot of my work is with men and women with anorexia nervosa. Oh, so I spend a lot of my time telling parents that the brain is 60% fat. Yeah, and when these girls and boys now start restricting fat, it profoundly affects their brain. And sometimes permanently. So the brain needs fat. It needs saturated fat, unsaturated fat. And during development, if we don't give the brain the adequate fat, development is severely affected. So I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Again, I'm just noticing it anecdotally, but it works for me and I feel better. You also mentioned in the book, this is in the section of the book where you're talking about general nutritional protocols, the amino acid NAC, N-acetylcysteine. You say it's an antioxidant and helps treat cognitive decline. N-acetylcysteine, NAC, is fun for me as a psychiatrist to talk about because we have what's called double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. So there's research. I'm surprised. Yeah. Research for depression, for anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, for compulsive hair pulling. So it's one of the few nutrients that have crossed the line from the nutritional world to the academic research world. Why do you think that is, doctor? Somebody just started doing the research and it works. And again, it costs pennies. So I'm not quite sure why there's continued research, but it's just been on that track for maybe 20 years, and now some growing research around Alzheimer's.
And N-acetylcysteine is an amino acid. I think the way we eat, we don't necessarily get all of the amino acids that we need. But it also, isn't it a precursor to the master antioxidant glutathione, didn't you write in the book?
Correct. And that's the mechanism we believe is why it's so important for all these kind of diverse brain health issues.
Well, see, I'm surprised that they're funding N-acetylcysteine research, but nobody wants to fund lithium. I don't understand.
That's shame and that's stigma, and it's just, too simple is sometimes part of the problem.
All right, so N-acetylcysteine. Now, you do say this in the book, and you're fine to mention this. You say in the book that that N-acetylcysteine amide is the more bioavailable form of N-acetylcysteine. But when I asked you, where, because when I read that in the book, I immediately started, because I take N-acetylcysteine, straight N-acetylcysteine. So I even called my health food store and I said to the guy, I said, look, can you get an N-acetylcysteine amide product, blah, blah, blah. He started doing research. He's like an encyclopedia. I started looking. You even told me it's not really available.
Right. I mean, there's some research on it, and there's a group that's probably going to try to distribute it.
Okay, but
now all the research that we have has been with just NAC, so N-acetylcysteine. So we have the research to support using just NAC, and that's been sufficient to provide all these pretty dramatic improvements in mental health.
And again, it's a simple amino acid that you can get at the health food store.
Correct.
Doctor, what are your final thoughts? And how can we I want your final thoughts on this, because again, for me, the fear when you Alzheimer's disease, I think each of us fears getting it because it's the ultimate loss of dignity. It's the loss of control. It's a horrible, horrible disease. I mean, like I said, my grandfather died in a nursing home wearing a diaper. I mean, this is a big, strong man who built houses. You know what I mean? So it's such a horrible thing, and none of us wants to get it. But so many people take a gamble when it comes to their brain health. And it disappoints me because I just feel like people wait. People's MO is often to wait until something's wrong and then try to fix it. And often there isn't a fix.
I think the billions and billions of dollars we've put into that fix for a pill, it's worked for some disorders. It has not worked for this disorder. So the brain is just too complex. And so the solution is going to be complex. And for me in this book, we just picked some very simple nutrient interventions that anybody could do. But we have to kind of layer it on top of what I don't talk about in the book, which it seems obvious, but sometimes hard, is stress. And stress destroys brain cells. And lifestyle factors and other dietary factors and early trauma. And so there's many, many layers of what we would consider important variables affecting brain health. So it's not one vitamin, it's not one supplement, it's not doing one yoga class. It's really putting together a lifestyle, really kind of nurturing your brain's health.
Well, and you even mentioned in the book that, you mentioned Dan Buettner, who's looked at the blue zones of the world, where people have abnormally long lifespans, they're healthy, they have low levels of heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease. And you put in the book, the thing, having social connections, important social connections, having a purpose to your life, a reason to get up in the morning. You talk about all those things.
Those lifestyle factors and those human connections seem to be as important as some of our biochemistry that we refer to. Spirituality, having faith, seems to be important. So it is really a complicated array of common sense. Yeah. But oftentimes we, as you described, wait till the end to try to treat a very diseased brain, and we just can't. But
to end on a happy note, based on neuroplasticity, which isn't it the brain's ability to regenerate and kind of remold itself, if there has been damage due to stress, trauma, and any of the things that you mentioned, taking a lot of these steps, lithium, NAC, vitamin D, B12, B6, all these, you can you can enhance the health of your brain if there has been damage. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's why I still do this work. And
okay, because there's hope.
There's hope, absolutely. And the book series Psychiatry Redefined is we're trying to redefine that symptomatic base. We're going to have a Band-Aid for all these illnesses. But if we look at the underlying cause, then we can use words like cure and remission and develop a model of prevention. And that's hopeful.
Brilliant. I think that's brilliant. That was brilliant. You guys, it's time for the Tara Marie's tip. I thought a lot, Doctor, as I was reading this. I always give my Tara Marie's tip, just some thoughts at the end. I interact with a lot of people, just either my family or just out, working in fitness. And I see a lot of trends in belief systems. And I was telling you this story about an aunt that I was talking to just last night. And the main thing I got from this book was wishing people would open their minds to the possibility that there's another way that doesn't include drifting off into dementia as we age. I think a lot of people have this idea that aging is just about things falling apart and getting diseased, and they think that aging, it's just normal to drift off into a state of dementia. And what I think is just because something's common, because obviously now that's a very common thing to happen, just because something's common doesn't make it normal, correct? I mean, it's common in this country to be obese or overweight. That doesn't make it normal. So what I want people to think about is to understand the power of belief and understand the power of epigenetics, that our environment affects our genes, and to understand that we have power to change our lives through what we do, what we eat, what we drink, what we don't eat, what we don't drink, the chemicals to which we expose ourselves, all these things. And also, I find that in my family, I was taught a lot of limited beliefs when I was growing up about what aging looks like and what happens to us naturally as we age. And I thought about this last night, and I thought that your belief system greatly informs the outcome of what you get. Because if you believe that it's, in my family, the belief is it's just normal to get dementia as you age. And I think if you believe that certain things just happen to you, then you're giving away your power to fate, and you're giving away your power to the disease. So my attitude is take proactive steps to keep your body healthy, to keep your brain healthy, rather than wait and react when you're diagnosed with some dreaded disease. Don't settle for what's common and accept it as normal, because I see a lot of people do that. You can control your health and you can control the outcome of your health a lot more than you know. And Doctor, I was telling you that story last night. I was talking to my aunt who takes metformin, and I called her up and I said, look, I'm reading this book and I just want you to check your homocysteine levels. Doctor, you mentioned in the book that metformin raises homocysteine. And I called her up and I said, listen, I just want to make sure, since you're taking metformin, that you check your homocysteine levels throughout the year. And she just poo-pooed the whole thing. So she said, I don't believe that. She didn't even know what homocysteine was. I told her that I read this in a book. She said, you're just one person. What do you know? She said that about you. So a lot of people believe that the fate of what happens is just fate, and there's not a lot you can do about it, and they're not going to take a lot of precautions. So I just believe that your beliefs greatly inform how things turn out, because if you believe that something just happens, you're not going to take steps to prevent it.
Absolutely. No, I think that was very well said.
Yeah. So that's our show. And that's all for today. I think this was a fascinating show. If you're hearing this episode as a podcast, you want to watch the show, go to youtube.com/Tara Live, search for the video entitled Integrative Medicine for Alzheimer's Disease, and you can access my YouTube channel on my website, TaraMarie.com. I want to thank my guest, Dr. James Greenblatt. For more information about his work, visit psychiatryredefined.org, psychiatryredefined.org. And do yourself a favor, get a copy of his book. This could literally change the trajectory of your life or the life of someone you love. It's called Integrative Medicine for Alzheimer's. It's part of his Psychiatry Redefined series. If you go to psychiatryredefined.org, Doctor, they can find all of the books in this series. You can also get this book on Amazon.com. So thank you to you, Doctor. This was fantastic. You guys, please rate and review Tara Marie Live on iTunes. And be sure to subscribe to Tamry Live so you never miss an episode. You can subscribe using iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Just search for Tamry Live. And you can find all episodes of Tamry Live posted on my website, tamry.com. While you're there, do sign up for my mailing list. You'll get my newsletter with tips on fitness, nutrition, motivation. And I always send out information about the latest podcasts, so you'll be up on the news. Connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at Tamry Live. And on Twitter at Tamry_live. Make better choices today than you did yesterday, and you will always be moving in the right direction. Thank you to Dr. James Greenblatt. Peace out.